Halloween may be over, but haunted house season is just beginning. Welcome back to Book Break. I'm going to talk to you about some of my favourite haunted house novels. I have just read 2 in a row, and so I no longer feel safe walking around my house at night because that was a terrifying experience. But these books were so different from each other that it really inspired me to have a broader look at haunted houses in novels and how different the books within that genre can be. So let's start with Starling House by Alex E. Harrow, which has been such a highly anticipated release. Alex E. Harrow is a hugely beloved author, and this book is finally out, and it is everything you have been hoping for. It is absolutely brilliant. Starling House takes so many of your favourite aspects from different stories, but creates something brand new with them. So it is sort of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It is sort of a Hades and Persephone story. It's got some Shirley Jackson vibes. It's got some Alice in Wonderland vibes. There are so many references in here which I really loved, but as I said, the overall effect is something brand new, and that's why this book is a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, and she does have the greatest taste. It's a really, really exciting new haunted house story. So I loved the foreword in here. Right from the beginning, Alex E. Harrow talks about her inspirations for writing this book, and she said something I thought was really interesting about the portrayal of haunted houses in different kinds of stories. She said that in a Southern Gothic story, for example, the house is the bad guy, whereas in a fairy tale, the house is often on your side. And so in Starling House, she kind of combines these and came up with something in the middle. Starling House itself is very much a character in this book, and it is a terrifying haunted house, but it is also a friend and companion throughout the story. The house definitely has its own motivations and does what it can to push the characters in certain directions, and I really loved that. So what is the book actually about? Starling House is set in Eden, which is a small town in the States, a kind of small, forgotten, dying town, which is right on the site of a massive power plant. So there's this really rich family who own a power plant, and it is contaminating the air and the water, and so the citizens of Eden are struggling and getting poorer and poorer, and many of them getting iller, and all of these terrible tragedies and kind of mysterious deaths keep happening. And so this family, the Gravely family, who don't themselves live in the town because they know it isn't safe, are sort of enemy number one in this town. Our main character is a young woman called Opal who lives in Eden with her younger brother Jasper, who is still at school. They live in a motel. Their mother has died. They didn't know their fathers, and so Jasper is Opal's number one priority in life, and she just wants to get him out of this town and on to have a better life. And so she is working really, really hard, multiple jobs in order to do exactly that. And so, of course, she says yes when she is offered a job that seems too good to be true, working at Starling House. So Starling House is this dark, brooding, haunted-seeming house in the town. There have long been stories and rumours throughout the town about Starling House and about the strange people who live there. There's been a long line of inhabitants of this house, people who mysteriously show up, are never really seen outside the house, and then vanish, and then a new heir to the house arrives. So currently living in Starling House is a man called Arthur, who offers Opal this job. So I've given you a lot of information about this book, but that's because Starling House is all of these things rolled into one. It is a haunted house story, it is a romance, it is a dark gothic fairy tale, it is an environmental story, it is a horror story. It is so clever. There's honestly so many other details that I want to tell you. There's so many different elements to this story that I could talk about for hours, but I feel like I should actually let you discover some of it for yourself. So I will leave it at that for now, but suffice to say that in this book you will find dark family secrets, you will find childhood nightmares, childhood dreams as well, you will find love, and you will find a really good fairy tale. Palace of Shadows by Ray Celestine is another really clever haunted house story that I read this year. This one is a gothic novel, and this very much has the haunted house as a bad guy angle on things. The house in this book is terrifying and has been haunting me ever since. If you look closely at the cover here, you might be able to see, I don't know how much you can see on screen, but that it actually depicts a completely impossible room where staircases are going in the wrong directions, doorways are opening on the floor and ceilings. It is a room that doesn't make sense. And that is because that is how the house in this book is depicted. If you picture any of those paintings you've seen of kind of impossible rooms, impossible buildings, that is very much the inspiration behind the house in Palace of Shadows. The main character in this book is a penniless artist called Samuel who paints these kind of impossible seeming illusions, and he is commissioned by a mysterious heiress to come and continue being an architect for this house that she has been building for many years with many different architects over the years. This sprawling house the size of a town taking over the moors in Yorkshire where it's built, and he is to come and be the latest in a line of architects. And basically everyone he meets along the way in his journey to this house warns him not to do it, because there are so many stories about this house being haunted and people being driven mad by staying there. But he needs the money, and it's a really, really good commission. There are so many points in this book where I was screaming at the page, get out of there, from the second he arrives in the house and everyone is desperately trying to warn him to leave. I was getting chills down my spine. This is a house you do not want to mess with, and you do not want to leave your room and walk around at night. Trust me on that one. The structure of this book was really clever, especially considering that it is all about these kind of impossible seeming buildings, these houses within houses, and the structure of the book kind of reflects that. So it begins just as a regular novel following the story of Samuel, but then Samuel finds a diary, and then we go inside the diary. It's the diary of the past architect, and we read his diary up to the point where he discovers some letters by someone else who is working in the house, this figure that we don't totally trust. And so we then go inside the letters and we read the letters up to the point where he references another book, and then we go into that book. So it's going all the way down through these different layers, and then we come back up out of the layers again. And I loved that. I thought that worked so well, especially for this story. Ray Celestine is a prize-winning crime writer, and I really love that he's done something completely different with Palace of Shadows. This is a new genre for him, and I would like him to keep writing in this genre because he smashed this one. This book absolutely terrified me, but I could not put it down for a second. So then, looking back to some books that I read slightly longer ago, I've got some more haunted house novels that I would like to recommend to you. So for something completely different again, The Upstairs Room by Kate Murray Brown is a book that fits into my favourite genre of, is this supernatural or isn't it? So it's about a family that moves into a new home, and pretty quickly the mother of this family becomes convinced that this house is haunted, and really creepy things do start to happen. But there's always maybe a rational explanation for them. So the whole way through you're trying to work out if you can explain all of these things away, if there's another reason for everything that's happening, or if there are some things that are just too spooky not to be real ghosts. I loved that book as well because it really dives into the family dynamics. It's really a book that's about the characters and about their relationships to each other, and about what each member of the family is going through in their own lives, and how that kind of plays itself out on the house, on the home itself. So it's a really character-driven story, but it's got this extra little element of the supernatural playing out on top of it as well, which isn't something I've come across very often, those two types of books coming together, and I loved it. It was really, really beautifully done. It's a slower book. It's more kind of moving and emotional. Still definitely gave me chills though. White is for Witching by Helen Oyemi uses the kind of character of a haunted house in this book to talk about racism and xenophobia. So this is about a haunted house that is xenophobic. It's such a clever and unusual idea. It's a really terrifying and hostile house. Helen Oyemi really cleverly weaves different elements from fairy tales and from Caribbean folklore through this story to come up with something unlike anything I've ever read. If you've ever read a Helen Oyemi book before, you will know these are the kind of books that you are going to want to read more than once, because there are so many layers to all of her books, and they're not always easy to understand what's going on when you first start reading them, and then you realise that she's a complete genius, and then you want to read them over and over again. The Good House by Tananarive Due is about a house kind of haunted throughout the generations, about this family who have this sort of generational magic that they can harness. It sort of dives into some of the history and beliefs behind voodoo. And that book really creeped me out. It's another one that's really emotional and moving as well. The main character is a woman who has lost her son. He was killed, and she goes back to the house where he died to kind of confront her grief. And so it's a very emotional book. It's also quite Stephen King-esque in the horror. I've heard a lot of people making that comparison. I think it is a very good one. So fans of Stephen King should definitely read The Good House. I really liked how it had different timelines that we jump between, so you really get to see the impact of this family curse and this family magic through the generations. The moral of the story being, don't mess with curses. And then of course there's The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which is kind of the pinnacle of haunted house stories. It's a gothic horror novel from 1959, and it's about a group of people who come together to investigate paranormal happenings at this house, Hill House. And again, the house there I think is maybe some of the inspiration behind Palace of Shadows, because this is a house that does not make sense from the inside. It just shouldn't be the shape that it is. It's sort of an impossible building that shouldn't exist, and I love that. I think that's used really cleverly in quite a lot of books. House of Leaves, for example, by Mark Z. Danielewski. That's another very, very clever book with so many different multimedia elements in it. But again, at the heart of it is this house that just doesn't quite make sense, that is bigger when measured from the inside than from the outside. I love that kind of thing. I've gone off track. I was talking about The Haunting of Hill House. You may have seen the Netflix adaptation, a really fun, spooky adaptation, but quite different from the original story. So I would really advise you to pick that one up and discover this book that is kind of the ultimate haunted house novel. So I would love to hear your haunted house book recommendations, because it's a genre that I am really loving at the moment, even though it does terrify me. And if you're looking for somewhere to start, I really, really recommend any of the books that I've mentioned in this video. But particularly I do love at the moment Palace of Shadows by Ray Celestine and Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. I will link here to a playlist of all of the crime, thriller and horror book recommendation videos that I have ever made. If you want more in this broader genre, do click through and have a watch, and I'll see you next time.